The Battle of Debaltseve has ended. The Kremlin hybrid army failed to achieve its goals despite the siege of the city and its transport hub. The Ukrainian armed forces preserved their combat power and held defensively. At that time, the offensive capabilities of the Russian-backed militants was fully depleted. The overall tension of the battle actions has diminished, though a peace treaty has not been signed. On February the 20th, 2014, the so-called 15th humanitarian convoy was sent to the occupied territory of the Donbass. The column was rather unusual. The event was not covered by the Russian mass media. The number of the vehicles was not significantly large. Indeed, the convoy consisted of 30 trucks and 4 accompanying vehicles. This so-called humanitarian convoy transported the bodies of Russian soldiers who were killed in the battle for Debaltseve from the Donbass. You're watching the 49th episode of the program about the ATO, History of the War. In 2014, the Russian Federation launched a heavily armed aggression against Ukraine. The war has been ongoing for several years now. We are investigating the course of this war and are hot on the trail to trace the links between military operations, diplomacy, politics, and economics. We're trying to understand how it transpired and why. Soldiers will never go into the battle without chances for success. The warfare science is akin to mathematics, where there are formulas and ratios. Applying this knowledge, the commander of a military regiment or platoon is able to estimate the required resources and the potential losses of soldiers in advance. To perform a successful offensive operation, the attacking army has to have a threefold superiority in terms of the number of soldiers or a total predominance in the quality of the training of soldiers and subdivisions. And if the Ukrainian armed forces did not have the required number of soldiers and military hardware, then the situation in the battle against the army of the Russian Federation would have been considerably more delicate and tricky. Analyzing the combat situation, Kremlin strategists understood that further advancement to the north and west would be possible only if they would widely use rocket launching forces and aviation. In such a case, it would have been a full-scale invasion that would have made it impossible to cover up. Taking into consideration the reputational and economic risks, the Russian leaders refused to directly use military force. It should be remembered that despite its jingoistic propaganda, Russia depends on a Western capital. Striving for huge profits, Western countries will turn a blind eye to the military conflict in the Donbass initiated by the Kremlin. But in case of Russia launching an aggressive war, nobody will maintain business relations with the country-aggressor. The intensity of the battles has diminished. The process of renewal of combat capacity and solving the issues of exchanging prisoners and returning the bodies of the killed soldiers began. But de-escalation is not an immediate or quick process. The battles of local significance and the destructive shelling took place almost every day. Despite the fact that Mariupol became the hottest spot of the front, on February the 21st, Avdiivka also came under heavy firing. The enemy tried to strike Ukrainian military positions, but failed, and the shells hit a residential building that caused the death of 2 innocent civilians. One woman living in the private sector of the city stepped on an unexploded shell that fell in her vegetable garden. Such was her encounter with the Russian world, as a result of which she sustained numerous shrapnel wounds. On the very same day, a shell struck a cafe located not far from the Avdiivka coking plant. As a result of a direct strike, 3 innocent visitors were killed on the spot. On February the 22nd, 2015, in Kharkiv, during the events dedicated to the anniversary of the Euromaidan, there was a terrorist attack aimed to destabilize the situation inside the country. The Russian-led militants planned to hold a similar action in Odessa, but the security service of Ukraine managed to prevent it. Meanwhile, there were battles in Shirokina. The enemy used not only drones of aerial reconnaissance in this area, but it also reinforced its troops, having sent several units of military hardware and 350 soldiers to Shirokina. As a result of one-day violent street fighting, one person was killed and 5 civilians were wounded. The following night, a Russian subversive group, consisting of 5 persons, was eliminated by the Ukrainian soldiers. Unlike in the northern zone of the ATO, where the configuration of contact lines depends on different heights, rivers and high-density urban area, there is a lot of open space in the area of Mariupol. These conditions make it possible to actively use artillery and armed vehicles against Russian hybrid forces. But on the other hand, it is very easy to hide in the local fields outside the city, which was favorable for the infiltration of saboteurs. On February the 23rd, in Mariupol, 3 officers of the Sokil Police Special Unit, together with a traffic police inspector, stopped a civilian vehicle for inspection. Russian-backed militants who were inside the vehicle immediately opened fire. As a result of the shooting, 2 special forces officers were wounded and 1 person was killed. 1 Russian-backed militant was also killed, and the second managed to escape. It is important to remember that being the only large port on the Azov Sea, Mariupol played an important role in the economy of Ukraine. Needless to say, the breakdown in the work of an industry which accounts for the transport of 30% of raw materials and 60% of products by rail, could have had dealt a very serious blow to the country's defense capability. In December 2014, blowing up of the bridge over the Kalchik River almost led to the shutdown of both metallurgical plants in the city. In short, the trains ran across a hastily repaired old bridge, which had not been used for several decades. It was precisely this auxiliary bridge that was the main target of the Russian-led militant groupings. Having indicated its readiness to fulfill the Minsk agreements and withdraw heavy weaponry, the Russian-backed militants continued to strengthen their positions. The enemy intensified its actions in the area of Chernohorivka, Avdiivka and Dokuchaevsk. Besides that, an echelon fully equipped with ammunition was sent to Ilovaisk. It is important to remember that Putin signed the Minsk agreement. Despite its ambitions, being under international pressure, the Kremlin was forced to initiate the agreed withdrawal of heavy weapons. But this process was more like a staging. Some of Russian soldiers were rotated, some of the forces were withdrawn from the territory of Ukraine to the Russian Federation, and the rest of the subdivisions were withdrawn along the second front line. But the Russian-backed militants, who are practically subdivisions of the Russian army, are always at the disposal of the Russian military staff. By using these forces, Russia can keep the Ukrainian forces in suspense and continue to conduct offensive military operations. On February the 24th, the Ukrainian positions in the area of Shirokina came under the enemy's mortar attack. Having stricken back, the Ukrainian troops destroyed a fuel truck, a Zu-23 anti-aircraft mount, a truck with ammunition, and more than 10 Russian-backed militants. In the areas of the Zhovten and Zaichenko settlements, the Russian hybrid forces fired multiple artillery rocket systems. Having changed its tactics, the Kremlin did not back down from its intentions. Russia played on 2 fronts at the same time. Indeed, it proposed a peaceful settlement of the conflict, while at the same time it provided Russian-led militants with money, fuel, heavy weaponry, and ammunition to continue their aggression. On February the 24th, the next 16th humanitarian convoy was sent to the Donbass. As usual, it consisted of 170 trucks, 1,800 tons of different cargo and some white Kamaz trucks, indeed delivered food rations and building materials. Uploading of the truck was actively covered by the Russian mass media. Notwithstanding this fact, all the same the bulk of the cargo ultimately had a strictly military purpose. On the night of February the 25th to 26th, the town of Popasna came under heavy fire of the enemy. In the morning, Russian-backed militants attacked Ukrainian positions in the area of Shirokina on a number of occasions using tanks and mortars. As a result of the battle, a large enemy ammunition depot was destroyed. the International Red Cross Committee arranged the delivery of humanitarian aid to the frontline towns Talakivka and Hnutove. Each family got a supply of food for a month, warm clothing, as well as a tarpaulin to insulate the damaged housing. It is remarkable that on the night of February the 25th to 26th, the ceasefire was maintained throughout the ATO zone. But already by daylight, the Russian-backed militants again launched attacks in the direction of Donetsk. The Ukrainian positions in the towns of Pisky, Avdiivka, Mariinka, and Opitne came under heavy artillery fire. As a result of the strike of a tank shell, 3 soldiers of the 90th Battalion were killed in the area of the village of Vodyane. On the same day, 15 bodies of the killed soldiers were brought from the battlefield in the area of Debaltseve, and the 66th Military Field Hospital from Lviv was set up in the area of the Donetsk Oblast. Implementing the Minsk agreements, the Ukrainian army prepared to withdraw heavy weapons from the line of contact. However, this process involved taking a tit-for-tat measure from the side of Russia. The agreements called for the withdrawal of heavy weapons after a 24-hour ceasefire. But it was very difficult to ensure a complete ceasefire due to the waywardness of certain field commanders and the connivance of their Russian curators. De facto, this process was delayed for several months, but has never been fully completed. The next day, Russian-backed militants actively, albeit ineffectively, fired at Ukrainian positions in Opitne, Vodyane, Avdiivka, and many other settlements along the entire line of demarcation. Trying to hide from the OSCE observers, the militants conducted dislocation of their troops under the guise of withdrawal of military hardware to the areas of Shastya and Stanitsa Luhanska. In the southern part of the ATO zone, the degree of opposition has decreased slightly. Then the so-called 16th humanitarian convoy arrived on the occupied territory. According to OSCE observers, it consisted of 56 trucks transporting consumer goods, 21 tank trucks with fuel, and 8 escort vehicles. Taking into consideration the fact that 170 trucks left the territory of Russia, it can be assumed that the remaining 85 vehicles were transporting ammunition. It is logical that nobody showed these vehicles to the observers. On the same day, the village of Pisky came under enemy fire. The environs of the Donetsk International Airport will long remain the arena of local battles. The war slowly turned from the competition of mechanized units into a confrontation between sniper and sabotage groups. On February the 27th, soldier of the 93rd Brigade Maxim Sarancha was killed as a result of mortar fire. This Ukrainian soldier was the last to die in the first year of the war. In total, this difficult year took the lives of 2,373 soldiers. A war always ends in victory of one of the sides or the defeat of the other side. There is no other option. Peace talks, which usually crown the end of any war, are just a formal confirmation of the territorial or material concessions of the defeated state. But if the enemy is not destroyed, then it can easily strike again at any time. The next day will be as difficult as the previous one. It will be the first day of the second year of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and it will be the last day of winter.